Archaeologists opened a tomb hidden beneath the freezing mountains of Central Asia. Inside was a man unlike any they'd seen before. Beside him were finely carved wooden bowls, horse gear, and a pouch filled with cannabis that had been buried for nearly 2,700 years. Somehow the plant had survived. It had been placed there by accident. Whoever buried this man believed he'd need it in the next life. But this wasn't the beginning of the story. Long before there were kingdoms, before pyramids rose from the sand, and before people had even invented writing, humans had already discovered a remarkable plant. That plant was cannabis. Imagine living 10,000 years ago. Every day is a fight to survive. Then you discover a plant that can be woven into rope, turned into cloth, pressed for nutritious oil, eaten as food, and used to treat pain. To ancient farmers, it wasn't just another crop. It was one of the most useful plants they had ever seen. Some of the earliest written references to cannabis come from ancient China. A traditional medical text known as the Pen Cao Qing describes it as a remedy for illnesses ranging from joint pain to digestive problems. Whether every treatment worked is impossible to know, but one thing is clear: people valued the plant enough to write about it thousands of years ago. As trade routes expanded across Asia, cannabis traveled with merchants carrying silk, jade, spices, and precious metals. One of those routes crossed the towering Himalaya mountains. That is where archaeologists uncovered one of history's most fascinating discoveries. At a burial ground called Jerzon Cemetery, researchers found ancient wooden braziers filled with burned stones. Chemical analysis revealed traces of cannabis that had been heated during funeral ceremonies around 2,500 years ago. The people gathered around those fires weren't simply honoring the dead. They were likely breathing in the smoke together as part of the ritual. Thousands of kilometers away, a Greek historian named Herodotus encountered a group of fierce horse-riding warriors called the Scythians. He watched them enter small tents, throw cannabis onto glowing hot stones, and fill the enclosed space with thick smoke. He later wrote that the fumes were so intense that no Greek vapor bath could surpass it, adding that the Scythians shouted with joy. For centuries, many believed he had exaggerated the story. Then archaeologists began opening frozen Scythian tombs in Siberia. Inside, they discovered the very things Herodotus described: wooden tent frames, heated stones, and cannabis seeds preserved by the ice for over 2,000 years. Sometimes history sounds unbelievable, and until someone digs it out of the ground. Cannabis wasn't only used in the cold north. Far to the south, in ancient India, it became part of religious tradition. One of Hinduism's oldest sacred texts, the Atharva Veda, lists cannabis among sacred plants. A drink known as bhang, prepared from cannabis leaves, has been consumed during certain religious festivals for centuries and remains part of some traditions today. Meanwhile, back in China, another remarkable story was unfolding. Around the 2nd century AD, a physician named Hua Tu developed a medicine believed to have helped reduce pain during surgery. Ancient records describe patients receiving a mixture containing wine before undergoing operations that would have been almost impossible without some form of anesthesia. But Hua Tu's life ended tragically. After falling out of favor with the powerful warlord Cao Chao, he was imprisoned and sentenced to death. According to later accounts, he tried to pass on his medical writings before his execution. When no one dared accept them, those writings were lost forever. Imagine how many discoveries disappeared with them. Now, for thousands of years, cannabis continued serving different purposes across civilizations. Sailors depended on hemp rope strong enough to survive violent storms. Farmers wove its fibers into cloth. Families pressed its seeds into oil. Doctors experimented with its medicinal properties. Priests used it in rituals. It was simply another part of everyday life. Then the 20th century changed everything. In the United States, Harry Anslinger became the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He launched an aggressive campaign against marijuana, linking it to crime and social disorder, despite growing disagreement among many medical experts of the time. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act severely restricted its use. Decades later, in 1970, marijuana was classified as a Schedule I substance under U.S. federal law, placing it in the same legal category as drugs considered to have a high potential for abuse and no accepted medical use under federal law. That decision would shape debates that continue today. It is strange when you think about it. For thousands of years, people around the world grew cannabis for rope, clothing, food, medicine, and ceremonies. Entire generations lived and died with the plant as an ordinary part of life. Then, within the span of a single century, it became one of the world's most controversial plants. And perhaps the most fascinating part of the story is the one we started with. A man was buried high in the deserts of western China nearly 2,700 years ago. His family carefully placed cannabis beside him before sealing the tomb forever. They couldn't have imagined that thousands of years later, archaeologists would reopen that grave, hold those same green leaves in their hands, and remind the modern world that the history of this plant is far older and far more complicated than most people ever realize.